Welcome to Stoichiometry Day 5. Today we are going to be describing and calculating percent yield. So, even though we wish they could, reactions do not always work perfectly. In real-life labs, experimental errors happen. This can be spills or maybe some contamination. And what this means is that the amount of product made in the lab is less than the amount that could have been made. So what does that mean? How are we going to use this? Well, when you have the yield that you could expect if everything went perfectly, we call this our theoretical yield. It's just the maximum amount of product that could be formed from given amounts of reactants. So when we do a mass-to-mass stoichiometry calculation, that is a theoretical yield. That's the maximum amount you could get if everything went 100% perfectly. Let's compare this to an actual yield. So in real-life laboratories, nothing ever goes 100% perfectly. Even really good science labs have some amount of error. This is called an actual yield. What an actual yield is the amount of product that can actually be formed or recovered when the reaction is carried out in the laboratory. Percent yield describes how much product is actually made in the lab versus the theoretical amount. This has a very simple equation, and that is percent yield is equal to the actual yield divided by the theoretical yield times 100. If you're saying to yourself, this looks very familiar, you are correct. This is very similar to the way we calculate percent composition. So, again, here is that equation, and if you're worried about something that this might be something that you have to memorize, I would say look at the bottom of the periodic tables that we've given you. It is on there. And I'm actually going to show you that in a second. We're going to switch over to document camera to start doing some of this math. And I'm going to show you where you can find that on your periodic tables. Okay, so on your periodic tables we've put multiple copies of this on Canvas. It gives you the percent yield equation. It's right there on the periodic table, and you can see it's very, very close to our percent error. So let's see how we can do this in our notes. All right, our first example says, when copper is heated with excess sulfur, 1.76 grams of copper 1 sulfide is formed. However, 2.1 grams of the product was expected. What is our percent yield? Don't be intimidated. These problems are actually very, very simple. So this number up top, this 1.76 grams, that's the amount your lab actually made. So our actual yield would be 1.76 grams. Our theoretical yield is this one here, this 2.10. That's the amount that we could expect if every condition was perfect. And then we're told to calculate the percent yield. So you can see the equation right up here. It says percent yield is equal to actual divided by theoretical times 100. So here's my formula. I'm going to say 1.76 divided by 2.10 times 100. All right, I'm going to put that into my calculator. Use your parentheses so you can do it all in one step. Okay, so I've entered that in with parentheses. Hit enter. So my percent yield is 83.81. I'm going to round it up, percent. 83.81%. Don't forget to do this step at the end of multiplying by 100 because that's what changes this from a decimal to a percent. All right, let's check our next example. Okay, it says in lab, you decompose iron 3 oxide and collect 1,520 grams of iron. What is the percent yield if 1,620 grams were expected? Okay, so my actual yield is the amount we actually got. Our expected, what our theoretical yield was, what we could get if all conditions were perfect, would be 1,620 grams. And to calculate our percent yield, we're just going to divide these two and multiply by 100. So our actual divided by our theoretical times 100. All right, I'm going to put that into my calculator. Once again, I'm going to use parentheses. And that way I can do it in one single step. So that would give me 93.83, because I'm going to round that up a little bit, percent. All right, let's do another one. A lab experiment produced 187 grams of sodium chloride, and our calculation showed that 205 grams should have been collected. What is our percent yield? Okay, so what we actually collected, our actual yield was 187 grams. Our theoretical yield, what we could produce if everything went perfectly, which it pretty much never does in science. There's always going to be some kind of a lab error, even if it's very small. Our theoretical yield was 205. And once again, we're just going to divide these two numbers and then multiply by 100. Okay. In your parentheses. All right, so I got 91.22%. Okay. And actually today's lesson was very, very short, so we've actually reached the end of our notes for this unit. So now we're just going to go on to do the homework, and it should be fairly simple. Great job!